Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Maureen O'Connor from Quilters Heaven in Northbrook, Illinois, and I am the Opinionated Quilter. Last week we talked about size of blocks. Today I'm going to talk about my opinion on the number of blocks. And I don't mean the number as in how many blocks make up your quilt. I mean the layout. Do you use even numbers of blocks, odd numbers of blocks? Behind me you see Janine Burke's curved log cabin. Many of you know that there are lots of layouts of log cabins. This is the barn raising layout. And in this layout, you need even numbers of blocks across so that your center is in the center side to side. Now you will see modern quilters do odd numbers, and that's all well and good, but for this particular layout where you have the center in the center, you need even numbers of blocks. And even in her pattern, all of the quilt sizes are 6 by 6, 6 by 8, 8 by 8, 8 by 10, and 10 by 10. You don't find a 5 by 7 in a layout for a barn raising log cabin. Now, for an example of a quilt that you use odd numbers is a double Irish chain. In the double Irish chain, you have two distinct blocks. You have a chain block and you have the alternate block. And to me, it would look odd if you stopped here and you had 4 blocks across, starting with a chain and ending with an alternate. To me, for symmetry purposes, it looks much better to start and end with the chain. So in this example, I have 5 across and 7 down. You could make a baby quilt of 3 across and 5 down. And of course, you could make a really gigantic quilt, say 9 by 11. It's however big you want to make it, but to keep symmetry, in my opinion, it's better to do odd numbers. This is another example of where, in my opinion, odd numbers are better than even numbers. When you have a quilt that has 2 distinct blocks, a snowball block and a rectangle block, I want to use an odd number rather than an even number. This quilt is from Donna Robertson's Easy Does It 3-yard quilts, and this is no knock on Donna Robertson or Fabric Cafe. I love their patterns. They're many of them super easy, super fast. You only have to pick 3 fabrics, and I've made many of them. But one thing that she does to keep it within the 3 yards is sometimes she does even numbers on a quilt like this. And in her book, this is set 4 by 6. If I start with a snowball block, I want to end with a snowball block. And so in my opinion, I much prefer 5 by 7 to 4 by 6. And this is the Moody Bloom collection from Moda, and I absolutely love it. But one thing that happened with this quilt was this fabric I put horizontal. And if you look at her pattern, you can see here that these blocks are vertical. And why is that? It's because someone who should know about directional fabric, I didn't even notice that the fabric was directional until I cut these blocks. So had I put these vertical, the way the pattern calls for, all the flowers would have been on their side. So I altered the pattern and made these horizontal rather than vertical, and in my opinion, it came out great. So don't be afraid to change a pattern, whether it's the direction or the number of blocks. If you like it better a different way, you should make it the way you want it. Today's episode is the split 9 patch. This is the quilt that started today's episode, And you may notice this is the barn raising pattern again, same as the log cabin up front. And I had great frustration making this quilt. Well, I had great satisfaction in that this was all scraps. These are all different white on whites. This is all scraps. I had great frustration in the pressing directions. As I put two blocks together, they always seemed to go in the same direction, and I kept clipping and repressing, and then the next block would need a clip and a repress, and I finally got so frustrated I just sewed it together with seams going in the same direction, and I didn't care. But I did have the thirst for knowledge of knowing the pressing directions for this particular quilt. And in starting to watch the videos, when I started walking on the treadmill, I saw a 2014 video from Quilt in a Day. It wasn't Eleanor Burns, but it was somebody who worked for her. And she was doing just plain half square triangles. And she said, don't press them yet, because you're going to have to press the fourth one in the opposite direction. And I thought, is that the solution for my pressing directions for this quilt? So I really wanted to try it again. And when we cut the half square triangles off of the trapezoids in the Hunter Star scrap version using the 5-inch squares, I had tiny little half square triangles. And I thought, well, I could use that to test out the pressing directions. And that's what I did. So the block is here. This is a 3-inch version, because these are 1.5 inch to finish to 1, and in the example the first one is a 6-inch block, which is 2.5 inch squares to finish to 2, but they're constructed the same way. You have 3 whites, you have 3 half square triangles with white on one side and color on the other, and then 3 color squares, and you just put them together in the traditional way. So for testing the pressing directions, I pressed, I did 2 at a time, and I pressed them opposite. So if I press towards the white here, I press towards the color, press towards the white. And in the second one, I would have done the opposite. And then as far as the rows go, if I did in, out, in, these were out, in, out, in, out. So it's opposite. I did 2 at a time opposite, so that I had all different pressing directions covered, and it worked. So I got 16 blocks here, and it's a 12-inch square. I tell you all the time that I like things smaller. This was too small. I hope to get 1 more row on the bottom and 1 more row on the top. I'll quilt it. It'll be an American Girl doll quilt, and I'm done with it. These pieces were just too small. One thing I noticed was if you're working on a 6-inch block or a 9-inch block, if there's a minute difference in the size of the squares or pieces, it's not real noticeable. When you're working with pieces this size, if there's a tiny little difference in size of the squares, it really makes a difference. And that just makes this kind of piecing just a little more difficult. I didn't have such a great time, but I was really happy to get the pressing directions figured out. And if you love this, just as a point of reference, if you want to make a quilt that's 48 by 60, that's 320 blocks. Not a very big quilt, but a lot of blocks. And when you figure there's 12 pieces in each block, you're handling an awful lot of pieces. Now, one thing that this is great for is using the same size strip to make the half square triangles as the strip you make the squares out of. And I know there's other brands, but this is the easy angle. And if you have a ruler that shows you the cutoff point on the top of the triangle, you can use this to cut, and get a half square triangle that fits the 1.5. You don't have to go to 1 7/8 if you have a ruler that marks off the tip point. Now, this only really works in strips. If you went ahead and pulled a square and said, I need a half square triangle of this pink, and you put this on here, and you cut this off, you don't have enough left for another half square triangle. This then becomes waste, which you know I hate that. So I would only use this to make half square triangles when you're cutting from strips, not from squares. After playing with that split 9 patch in the 3-inch version and not really enjoying it, I thought there's got to be a better way. And I know Deb Tucker has a what she calls a shaded 9 patch. I've done the shaded 4 patch before, but I've never done the shaded 9 patch. If you look at the shaded 9 patch, it's a half square triangle with scrap on one side and a solid on the other side. So I decided to pull out all my blues and give it a try. This is what I've made. This has all different stash, white on whites, and a whole bunch of different blues. And I have part of it made here that still needs 2 rows down here, and they're not here because they're on the table so that I can show you things about the construction. You may notice once again, it's the barn raising layout, and in her technique sheet, she gives you a whole bunch of other layouts, but this is my favorite. So this is what I did. In her technique sheet, she gives you all the measurements that you need to cut strips. She's got 7 different options of block sizes from 3 to 12 inches. I decided to do 6, which is the same as my scrap one. And I just followed the directions, cut the width strips that I needed. You sew them into strip sets, then you subcut them again according to the directions, and you put the subcut pieces into a piece that looks like this. The way she has you do it is this is position 1, 2, and 3, and then this is the second strip set, and then this is the same as the first up here, except for it goes 3, 2, 1. Now, one thing I noticed right away is when I did it her way of 1, 2, 3, and don't get me wrong, I love Deb Tucker. You know that. She has this seam go down. When the seams go down, I pin them. And the reason I do that is the feed dogs push them apart. So I quickly found that if I reversed it and went 3, 2, 1, what does that do for me? This seam allowance is going up and I don't have to pin. So I prefer to do it this way. I was able to sew all these units together without pinning. And for me, that's a plus. Now, when you follow then her directions, you've got the piece made, you draw lines on the 9 patch unit that you've made, and you go through the intersections, and that's all on the directions here. Here's an intersection you go through, here's an intersection you go through. You sew on these lines, and then you cut in between, and you end up with a half square triangle. Now mine did not come out in this direction because I sewed them opposite. So if you went ahead and took this block and you drew your lines in this direction the way it shows on the technique sheet, and you cut it apart, you would get a piece that, oops, wrong piece. You would get a piece that looks like this. This is the 3 position piece. That should have been cut apart this way. You want a block that looks like this with 3 half square triangles. You don't want this block here being a solid piece. So you have to then, instead of draw your lines this way, you have to draw them this way. You're still going through the intersections. You sew, you cut in between. You've got your half square triangles. Now everything's a little oversized, so you need to use your Tucker trimmer to square these up, and you just need to be sure you lay this on your square the proper spot. You have to line up one of the lines in through here, and you'll get all perfect pieces that all meet up. Now, the pressing directions on this worked great most of the time. These pieces here meet up perfectly. Here, meet up perfectly. One is going in one direction, one is going in the other direction. Works out great. Where it comes to be an issue is where the two meet like this. And if you notice, that is my fourth block. And that's just what the woman said in the Quilt in the Day video. The fourth one you have to flip. And that's exactly what I had to do here. And so I actually just took the seam ripper. These are both in the same direction, down and down. So I actually just take the seam ripper, rip that out, rip this out, press, press, go to the sewing machine, re-sew this. So now, oops, wrong way. So now these are up, this is down, and they'll meet together perfectly. So I had to do that when they met in the middle. One other place had to be flipped, and that is from here to here. This is the middle of the quilt. So when the direction switches from these points up to these points down, these are all in opposite directions of the one above it. So I had to go through and flip the seams of this one, this one, this one, and this one, which overall isn't too bad. It's much less frustration than I had with the scrap one. So this is my stash version of the what I call split 9 patch that Deb calls shaded 9 patch. And this one will really only work for stash because these are all different size strips. They're not anything you're going to find in your pre-cut stash bin. So whether you want to do a scrap version or a stash version, if you love the barn raising pattern, this is a great option. Make one, have fun, see you next time.